political mix-up we've been settled in has caused many issues. There's a car blocking the entire Route 1, and it was absolutely moved, and there was a Baruch Hashem Anes, b'chipazon yatzatem mitzrayim, b'chipazon egati to this year. I will discuss very briefly, but I need everyone to focus. I want to discuss the foundations and applications of mechirat chametz. No sheets. No, I'm talking just me. But if there's any problem, you won't fall asleep by me. I want to discuss the basics of the selling of chametz. I want to talk about 4 subjects, the foundation of it. I want to talk about details in mechirat chametz today, selling our chametz. I'm going to talk about an interesting question regarding sales to non-religious, and then maybe a final closure on how the sale works today. We have a halachic concern, and it's as follows. Owning chametz, consuming chametz on Pesach, is a severe halachic transgression. On top of all that, if somebody owns chametz on Pesach, and Pesach passes and didn't consume this chametz becomes halachically prohibited. It's called chametz she'avar alav Pesach. So not only do we have the prohibition to gain benefit and consume and own the chametz during Pesach itself, afterwards, if we didn't appropriately deal with this chametz, eat it, consume it in different fashions, we're talking about sell it, give it away, destroy it, I cannot use that chametz. That means if I have a bottle of whiskey that I had in my house that I did not sell, did not consume, it cannot be consumed forever. It's usur. This became a very big halachic issue 600 years ago. Why? During the Middle Ages, Jews had no right to property, had no right to finances, they had nothing. There are other times like that in history. About 600 years ago, the Jews were allowed to deal and negotiate and purchase and distribute yash. Yash was alcoholic drinks based in wheat products, and that was their entire parnasa. If I were to tell a situation that you were to make your entire merchandise, hundreds of thousands of rubles, whatever you call it, years ago, and on Pesach you had to consume it or throw it away, you lose your entire parnasa. And that reignited the idea of selling one's chametz. One can sell one's chametz before Pesach, have it owned by a non-Jew, and then repurchase it back afterwards. Before I get into the details of how legitimate the sale is, it should be known that this is not a new invention. People confuse the idea that mechirat chametz is some kind of fancy rabbinic invention, such as heter iska, such as pruzbul regarding shmita, such as maybe heter mechira, but it's actually very much incorrect. Mechirat chametz is mentioned over 1800 years ago. The Tosefta, the Tanaic source of halachot brought, mentions a story. The story is a Jew and a non-Jew on a boat. And the Jew forgot he had his whole babka and cakes and cookies he left in his house in Babylonia. Now, the Tosefta says he has not enough time for the boat to arrive at his destination, back to his house, to deal with it. What does the Tosefta say? Mochro le'nochri. Sell it to the non-Jew and get it back after Pesach. This is a clear proof that the idea of mechirat chametz is not some new invention. It comes the time of the Tana. However, about 600 years ago, there was a very big halacha concern around selling chametz, and the history is very, very important. It's actually ironic because it's the opposite today, but there was a discussion when the mechirat chametz began that instead of having a general mechirat chametz sale, we should have each individual should find his own non-Jew and sell it to them. Make some kind of agreement and sell it on your own. And that was done. There are a bunch of rabbanim about 600 years ago who felt it preferable than having a general sale by a rabbi or a whole appointment or a whole formal selling procedure with a rabbi and passing it onwards and a general sale for the shtetl or the company. We wanted personal sales that a guy should find on Jew and sell it himself. The Marash Kluger, Rav Shlomo Kluger and Rav Shal Natanzon were very against this for the basic reason that I can't compare your sale to my sale. Do you know are you selling or you're not selling? Are you doing it appropriately, doing it not appropriately? And the reason why this change was because, as I mentioned just a moment ago, it was very complicated to have a united system. So they initiated and instituted that the sale can be done, but it should be done in an organized fashion. You should not sell on your own. There should be a Beit Din of the city, of the country, of the shtetl, who will create a large sale of all the chametz of the residents of that area, and they will sell them and be the emissaries to sell them to the non-Jew. The obvious halachic concern, the elephant in the room that came about when this whole thing reignited hundreds of years ago, was how legitimate the sale really is. When I sell something to someone, there is a real discuss of purchase and passing it over. I want to be able to, you give me a compensation, I give you a product, or a piece of real estate, or an emblem, or whatever it might be. Here, the obvious issue is I'm selling the chametz, but I have no intent of you actually buying it. I want it back. I want to use it. If I have $150,000 worth of whiskey in my house, I very much want to have that whiskey after Pesach. So that's called in halacha harama. Ha'arama means I'm tricking you. It's like a game. In order to make the sale more founded, they created a system where I list where the chametz is. I have the goy gives a down payment. There's a realistic amount to what the chametz is worth. I have an area in my house where I allocate it, and so on and so forth. In order for the sale to be binding, there has to be a real system set up. And now I'm going to come to a very practical aspect that's very disappointing. Today, the sale has become so big, so large, so mass-producing of sales that it's caused a lot of halachic issues that I do want to mention today, and I'm going to explain why this happened in a couple of minutes. People now sell on the internet. I'm not talking about Amazon or whatever. People, they press their name, they go on, I'm not going to say Chabad or other websites, and they sell in a moment. And it makes the sale look a bit funny because you don't know who you're selling to. You don't know who's your shaliach. You don't know who the non-Jew is. We sell for ridiculous amounts of money. If I sell one bag of pasta for $17 or $18, that also is not realistic. Meaning there's a push now to make the sale more and more mass-produced that really hurts the sale, should it be. A person should sell his chametz with his rav. And the shtar should list exactly where I'm putting my chametz, how much it is worth, when am I selling, when am I getting it back. There has to be a real system. There's a big push to have the mass selling of chametz around Israel through all kinds of emissaries, and I recommend you find a rav who will sell your chametz in the appropriate fashion. There should be a kinyan. The person selling for you should do some kind of act of purchasing to show that you're giving over him the permission to sell it. And that's what's important, because sales have gotten very extreme. I'll give an example. I'll give you one example, 1 second. A very large example that's very disappointing is in certain new age, new modern sale of chametz, people want to sell the chametz that's swallowed up in the kalim, or the chametz that's stuck under my chair that's been there for 8 or 9 months. Now that, not only is that ridiculous in terms that it's not halachically prohibited, but nobody's going to actually buy it. And if you write in the shtar mechir that you sell your dishes and pots and pans, that creates another halachic problem. You have to tovu your kalim all over again. You get back to the goy. There are people who sell chametz that they might have left and all kinds of places. It becomes very, very, very. The importance of the mechira is making it as serious as possible. This mechira has gotten so out of hand that there's been a push in today's day and age by many rabbanim not to sell chametz. Or if you sell chametz, don't sell real chametz. Meaning, don't sell bread and pasta, cookies and cakes and flour. Rather sell, medicines, all kinds of stuff that might be suffix chametz. So it's become the opposite. And who should really sell chametz? Only stores and distributors and so on and so forth. The halach is if you have a reason to sell chametz, either you have a large amount of chametz you'll need till after Chag, which could be for your own reasons, or, which is most common, the most common mechir chametz I dealt with as a rav, is those who have alcoholic beverages. Nobody wants to sell their 500 shekel bottle of Glenfiddich or Glenminich or Achentoshen. If it's done, you can sell chametz. It is important, again, to find a shaliach, find a real rav, to list where the chametz is, to close it up, and to honestly mean that if somebody comes and gives you the amount that it's worth to buy that chametz, then you can buy it back. This year, yes?
You want to finish your sentence?
All right, I'll finish what's done, I'll go back to you. There is one important issue this year specifically regarding selling chametz, that we have Erev Pesach that happens on Shabbat. According to certain authority, we don't want the sale to start to bind on Shabbat. So it's important that the mechira, the selling itself, should actually occur right before Shabbos. When we sign the shtar right before Shabbos, you can list or you tell your rabbi that I'm keeping a bag of pitas. It's always recommended. There's just from experience, I'm much younger than many of you, but I recommend having pitas if you're having chametz, because you have the challah and especially the burnt challah that spreads in crumbs, and the wives and mothers start eating you alive. They're already stressed enough about Pesach. Don't make it any worse than it has to be. So you write in the mechir that I'm selling my chametz from Erev Shabbat, from a couple of minutes before Shkia, and then I'm also giving, except for the pitas and so on and so forth that I have after that I use for Shabbos. There have been cases, and this is important to ask your Rav. There have been cases where, for example, I've had this story where I realized that my kids ate the pitas for Arochat Eser, or I need to buy chametz Erev Shabbat. What do? I already sold my chametz. I already told my rabbi where it is. So in many shtarei mechira, many of the contracts of selling, it's listed specifically that if you happen to buy more chametz or need more chametz, you owe the non-Jew some money. It's important to confirm this when you're selling your chametz, that if you're going to buy anything else Friday afternoon, or someone's going to bring you something for Shabbat morning, or so on and so forth, that you are on top of things. Yes?
A Rab, respectable, who knows a lot, of a yeshuv, he and his family, they had a lot of kids, and he said you could sell the chametz, but he does it, to the store in the yeshuv, and then they take it like it's theirs, and then they know that at the end of the week, they're going to give it all back to you.
Yeah, there are some people who do that. That is how. That's a good question. What she's actually relating is a very good point. There are certain people who, because they don't want to sell chametz, they want to give it to somebody who actually can sell chametz. I actually did that once, so I'm guilty as charged. I had a large amount of whiskey I received from a friend, and I gave it to a store who sells their whiskey, and they sold it very well, and they had a whole system. So you can, those who don't want to sell because they're concerned it's not a real sale, prefer to pass over their merchandise to a individual or a representative or a body that really has to sell chametz. You can do that. It's not very practical. You're not going to go find makolot and bring in stuff and so on and so forth. I want to bring up a very interesting halachic discussion. This is the next part of our shir. But I hope it's very, very halachically complicated, but I think it's interesting to understand. In Israel, and this is why the reality of mechirat chametz becomes so concerning, we have, thank God, a large amount of merchandise, of products, and Jewish institutions. It's not like in for example in America or England or South Africa or Australia, where you have supermarkets that are owned lock, stock, and barrel by non-Jews and have a kosher section, or you have kosher you have kosher companies that are owned by non-Jews. Here you have a real concern that a large percentage of your general stores, makolot, supermarkets, distributors, importers are all Jewish. The concern is that, or the subject of contention is that not all of them are religious. What that does to the possibility of having chametz that shavar Pesach in Israel is a very, very, very serious concern. As such, there's been a real push, and there's a lot of positive aspect to this, is to have as many people, distributors, private homes, sell their chametz. Because if I own a wine shop that sells merchandise that's chametz, and I don't sell my chametz on Pesach, the entire merchandise is prohibited for consumption, period. If I own a makolet that has chametz, which I for sure have if I own some kind of merchandise, and I do not sell my chametz, it is prohibited, period. Now, the large conglomerates, the large supermarkets in Israel, which is either Yochananov, Osher Ad, Rami Levi, Shai Ravacha, Shuk Ba'ir, they sell their chametz normally. I want to say normally. They sell their chametz in a very professional and serious matter for two reasons. First of all, can you imagine being told that 500 million shekel worth of merchandise is down the garbage? I don't think they want to have that. They also have a number of rabbis' certifications certifying numerous products in the store, and they themselves want to take responsibility as rabbinical bodies to confirm this chametz is mutar. So the large conglomerates have no concern. Where is the problem with mechirat chametz? Pardon? The loker makolet. alcohol stores. You're gonna go visit a friend, and they have a store down the road that has mechirat chametz. They have a large alcohol store. What do you do? So I'm actually going to pass over a really interesting halachic question regarding what is the validity of mechirat chametz done by certain non-religious Jews. And what do I mean? There's a push for the rabbanut, to rabbis, to convince you to sell your chametz, and they think it's some kind of religious ceremony. I always find it funny. I mean, this year we have Sar Otzar, our Ministry of Finance is from, but every year when there's a Ministry of Finance is not from, they have a tekes mechirat chametz. Every year, a couple of days for Pesach, the Ministry of Finance visits the rabbanim, or the chief rabbis, and they have a mechirat chametz. And what he puts on a kippah? What do you put on a kippah for? It's not davening. You put on a kippah because he thinks it's a religious ceremony. There's a big problem that in order for mechirat chametz to be binding, people have to realize you're actually selling something. Same thing, by the way, I always say about Trumot and Masrot. When you remove the halachic ties from fruit and vegetables, you have to know you remove it. You're actually separating. You're allocating produce to be given to as a gift to somebody else. Mechirat chametz is not just a religious ceremony; it means something. And this comes into question a lot of sales today, where the person selling thinks it's some kind of just religious ceremony. I'm davening. I'm putting on a kippah. I don't mean to actually sell something. I have a true story a couple of years ago of a congregant of mine went to a store and saw him selling chametz on Pesach, but he had a kosher certificate. So what did I sold my chametz? So look, I have the paper, but I can still sell the chametz, right? He didn't grasp what he was doing. It's very important. So there's a big halachic question regarding the validity of selling chametz for somebody who does not grasp what it actually means. I heard this mahalach, this halachic this discussion by a very, very incredible person. Rav Yoel, his name was my Rabbi, Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. He was a tremendous Gadol Hador. Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. He was literally a wonder of the world to watch. His genius was almost unproportionate. And he had a question. He dealt with this halachic issue of the selling of chametz by somebody who does not grasp that it's actually a sale. I think it's a religious ceremony. He compared it to a very interesting halachic discussion that has to do with, let's all hold together. About 100 years ago, during the beginning of the British Mandate, a very big change happened in Israel. And during the Ottoman Empire, you could enter Israel almost freely. The first Aliyah were very, very big. The British Mandate stopped at some point the entry into Israel for all non-British citizens or mandate citizens. And many Jews were stuck in Europe, in Russia, in Eastern Europe, and could not come to Israel. That's why I'm sure you heard there was what's called a certificate. You had a certificate, right, to come into Israel. Rav Kook Zatzal helped many, many important dignitaries, including Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg's father, into Israel. You couldn't move people from Europe to Israel. And there were a couple of real cases. This is a real halachic situation. There were cases where a couple had gotten engaged. The chatan, the bridegroom, had gone to Israel to go learn. And his kala, his wife-to-be, was stuck in Europe. And she couldn't come over. He was already in Israel, and she couldn't come over. There was a loophole. Listen carefully. There was a loophole. The loophole was that if a British man or a citizen of the mandate, somebody who had a certificate, could bring over their spouse and children. So there were 2 or 3 cases. This is true. This is documented. There are 2 or 3 cases where they said, well, if the chatan is stuck in Israel and the kala is stuck in Russia, let's hop around. Let's make a trick. We'll use a mandate person in Russia who has a certificate, or send someone from Israel to Russia. We'll get them married they'll be their spouse. She'll come over to Israel, and then she'll marry her actual husband.
Why don't they just marry by shliach?
No, in order to get the British certificate to be able to move to Palestine, you had to have real chuppah v'kiddushin. They wanted to confirm there was real chuppah v'kiddushin, and they confirm that you were married. There's a real case of 2 or 3 couples who did this. And they came to Eretz Yisrael, and the question was, does the wife need a get? And it gets more complicated, because one of the bridegrooms was a Kohen. So this whole sad story did nothing. They brought this question to the Maharsham and the Rogachover. The Maharsham was Rav Shalom Shabdor Mibladi, and the Rogachover were 2 tremendous poskim, 2 Hasidic poskim in Europe, and they said that, of course, this is, even though it was fictitious kiddushin, because they only did it for some reason, the kiddushin is binding, and they need a get. What was his proof? The proof was, there's a Gemara that says that Rabbi Tarfon one of the Dole Tanaim, was very wealthy. He was a Kohen. And it said in the time of famine, there was a big famine in Israel, and he married 300 women. Why? The halacha is that a Kohen can receive truma, the halachic tithe, and he can feed it to his wife. So he had a large collection of truma. In order to help these women not be so hungry, he married 300 women, la'achilam betruma. Right? Says the Marsham and the Rugged Shaver, you see, he didn't plan on marrying 300 women. Who would marry 300 women? You crazy? You know how much you have to do with 300 wives? He married these women in order to be able to feed them. True, he didn't really want to marry them. He didn't have any idea in living with them and having any relationship with them. He wanted to help them feed them. So you see, even though he married for ulterior motives, which nobody ever does, he married for ulterior motives, the Kiddushin is binding, because based on that, the woman can have truma, and fictitious Kiddushin is Kiddushin. Yes?
But the Ketubah says that it has to be, you have to fulfill also the obligations to your wife.
That's a good question.
So he's not doing anything.
She's mochel. It's a good question. Ramosha Feinstein brings that as a question. Ramosha Feinstein brings that question. Then they asked Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, who was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, and he disagreed. He said they don't need a get. And the woman is not a grusha, and she can marry a Kohen, and it's fine. What was his proof? He said, you're not understanding Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon, who married 300 women, wanted the Kiddushin to be halachically binding. Because without the halachically binding of the Kiddushin, she can't eat the Truma. But these two people in Russia, they're getting married to get a certificate. They don't care about halachic binding. That's not a proof. Rabbi Tarfon wanted halachic marriage in order that's why they had Truma. These two the couple who gets married in Russia 100 years ago to get a stamp of approval so she comes to Israel, it's worth nothing. So the Marsham and the Rogachover said they need a get. Fictitious Kiddushin is Kiddushin. And the Hart Tzvi says, no, it is Kiddushin. Says Moiri Verabi Agon Rav Zamnechem Goldberg, that machloket is true regarding Mechirat Chametz, but it's the opposite. That dispute regarding whether the woman will need a get or not is the exact dispute regarding fictitious sales of chametz. Let's see if we get this. It's a little tough. Those who hold that fictitious kiddushin, because you signed on the dotted line and you did a kinyan, you did an action, you can't, even though you might not know all the idea what it actually means, it still works. That means if somebody goes and sells a chametz from a kolet of Tommy in some place in Yerushalayim, it's still binding and it's Mechira holds. But if I hold the woman doesn't need a get, because fictitious kiddushin has no halachic significance. So somebody who sells chametz only out of a religious obligation or to make sure the rabbanut doesn't bother him afterwards does not make the mechira binding. Rav Zalman Nechemia said it was a very complicated halach, and he felt that we should make sure that when we're selling, people should know what they're selling. He added an anecdote. I have to add it because I heard this word for word from Moiri Verabi. Rav Zalman Nechemia said that there's a famous story. There was a king of Austro-Hungary named Franz Joseph. And there were a bunch of non-Jews who wanted to cause the Jews some trouble. That doesn't happen. Nobody causes trouble today. We're all good. So they went to Franz Joseph and said, you know, the Jews in your kingdom are not paying taxes. He says, well, what's up, shot? I see they're all paying taxes. Every year, they have a sale. All the Jews. They sell on Erev Pesach, and they don't pay taxes. So Franz Joseph said, I don't care. Okay, these non-Jews wanted to make it bad for Jews, didn't work out. They brought this to the Chatam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, one of the tremendous halakha authorities of the 19th century. And they said, listen, we have a problem. In order for Mechirat Chametz to be binding, it has to be by law. Thank God in Israel now, and it's also important in America as well, that the Mechirat Chametz have actual halachic binding in the country. It shouldn't be just some fake Mechira. It means that if the non-Jew would come and go to court and say, here, I have here a list of the Chametz that I own, and I want to pay the amount, I want to take it, it has to be binding by law. They came to the Chatam Sofer and said, I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe our Mechirat Chametz is not binding anymore. Franz Joseph thinks it's a joke. So the Chatam Sofer, this is what Rav Zalman Nechemia told me. Chatam Sofer said that you didn't understand Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph wasn't saying that I don't believe Mechirat Chametz actually works. I just don't want to collect taxes on it. That's what he was saying. I read that Zabdach had an anecdote. So this is a real halachic question, the binding, the validity of selling of chametz by an individual who does not understand what he is doing. And this becomes a very, very large concern. Now, I'm going to bring, that was a little bit of interesting intellectual acrobatics, but I mentioned Rizal Menachem to me is, there's nothing more pleasant than that. I want to add another halachic concern regarding selling here in Israel, and then we will summarize. Since we're talking about a large amount of distribution and purchasing and sales and so on and so forth done by different parties who are all Jewish and non-Jewish, it becomes very, very complicated. There's an interesting aspect, specifically in the Israeli economy today, that may make things easier, but it may make things more complicated. There are 5 companies in this country that run over 68% of all the food market. And you all know this. Tnuva, Osem, Strauss, Coca-Cola, and Telma Unilever. That's Telma Unilever. That's Hellman's Mayonnaise. They own everything. All these 5 companies run the show. Not only do they own the companies, they own subsidiaries and they own distribution. It's huge. Now, some of these companies have gotten so big. What happens to a nice Israeli startup that starts to make money? What happens? They get bought out. So some of these companies are owned by non-Jews. For example, the largest food conglomerate in the world is Nestle. Nestle owns Osem, lock, stock, and barrel. Every nail, every soup nut, every bamba is owned by Nestle. They have non-Jewish representatives in the country that run the show. I've seen it with my own eyes. By the way, I always find it very ironic, and I have to say this on recording, whenever I go to visit the Osem factory in Sderot, they make petitim, they make these little couscous things. And you have to take a fresh challah. But it's ridiculous because if the entire company is owned by non-Jews, you don't do a fresh challah. But no, we do it just in case. It's a farce. But Nestle is owned by stockholders who may be Jewish. So the truth is that that was checked. It's actually still owned by Swiss businessmen. Nestle is still owned by non-Jews completely. So the question becomes, does that affect the mechira? For example, perhaps if Osem is distributing food and it's received by certain stores, maybe it's better because it's owned by non-Jews, so the mechira shouldn't have any concern. First of all, I always say those who don't want to rely on mechirat chametz, if you buy Osem products like a week and a half after Pesach that came from the Osem storages, it's mahadrim min mahadrim because it's vadai owned by non-Jews. It's owned by non-Jews, there's no question. This question brought up an interesting discussion that I want to discuss a bit. Well, by the time the storage stuff from the supermarket, they bring in new stock from Osem, they probably have their own stock. If I go to Rami Levi, for example, or Osherad, right, they're going to have stocks of their own food, right? They're not going to order from Osem's storage facility to replenish their merchandise. So the first couple of days, it doesn't happen like, it's not a snip of a finger. It takes time. So a week and a half afterwards, you're assuming amount of time, the stock from Osem, the replenish of stock is coming to the supermarket. This came to a halachic discussion I dealt with a lot this year, and I'm going to present it to you, and I'm not sure I have a good answer, but let's try together. How does selling and purchasing work in Israel? There are 3 types of sales. One sale is purchasing, meaning you are a distributor, you own a cheese company, you own a candy company, and you sell to a makolet, to a large supermarket chain. You bring over the merchandise, you bring over what's called a tudat mishloach, which is a proof of delivery, and then it becomes yours. So Rami Levi owns now the merchandise that's in his storage facility, no questions asked. There is a clause that if, for example, the merchandise is damaged or the expiration date is passed, you can give the merchandise back to Osem. It doesn't make it Osem's, it makes it Rami Levi's. The other type is we're normally done to small makolot here in Israel, where Osem or Telma or Tnuva are concerned that sometimes these small makolot don't pay on time. And they're really concerned they're going to go bankrupt or not pay. So they have the same process. They send their proof of shipment and they write, the merchandise belongs to Osem until full payment. In that situation, might be that the Osem products in the store, the Makolet, in Netivot, in Carmiel, in Yerushalayim, and Beit Shemesh, still belong to Osem, which would mean even if he didn't sell his Chametz, still mutter. However, it seems that wouldn't help, because by law, the fact that he writes that until it's payment full doesn't make a difference. He can't, for example, Osem can't decide that he has 100,000 shekel worth of merchandise by Tommy's Makolet, and he realizes that Osher Ad wants to sell it for even more, so he can't transfer, he can't go and take that merchandise. That doesn't work. In both cases, it belongs to Makolet. There is a third type, which is very, very interesting. It's called in Hebrew consignats. It's called consignment. There's a very new system, and this is really affecting how we buy and purchase. This is very, very important to understand how this works. Many, many large supermarket chains do not want to deal with so much merchandise and money at the same time. Small importers or small distributors will come to Osher and say, I want to sell my product. There's no problem. I'm going to sell you in consignment. You're going to have a shelf. This shelf will belong to you. The area in my storage will be by you. The money, it's all, if it breaks, if it's boned, it's all, I take no responsibility. What happens? Once that bag of breadcrumbs passes the scanner and the money transfers over, 25% of that product, the money I received, goes to you, distributor X, and goes to me, and the rest goes to you. Meaning the merchandise belongs to the distributor/importer until the sale is done. And this is mostly done with small distributors. So it won't happen with Osem, what happened with Unilever, that's also a large conglomerate, but I'll tell you where it becomes an issue. There are makolot in Israel that are owned by non-Jews. I'll give you one, you might have heard of it, it's called Dabach, a very large supermarket chain in the south, owned by non-Jews. You walk in there, you assume, well, it must be all owned by non-Jews, but you don't realize that the Cheerios or the other cereals on the shelf actually belong to the Jewish distributor. And if he didn't sell his chametz, you have a problem. Correct? The Jewish distributor. Dabach is owned by non-Jews. Dabach is a supermarket. Dabach has all. He sold in consignment. It's not his. It still belongs to the distributor, the Jewish distributor who brought him all the cereals. So he's got to sell it. How do we confirm selling of products? So this is very, very practical. If you see on a product, Be'ishur HaRabbanut HaRashit L'Yisrael, regarding kosher, I cannot abide. But regarding selling of chametz, the Rabbanut tries very hard to push that these distributors and importers sell their foods. Where can it be a concern? You'll see products, and I have to take responsibility, you'll see products that have the OU, or the OK, or the Chafke, or the COR, that do not have the Shor Rabbanut HaRashit, and it's brought in by an importer. Now, this company, General Mills, or Life, or Kellogg's, is owned by non-Jews. They don't sell their chametz in America, but they brought in 8 or 10 or 15 containers of cereal to Shlomo, who lives in Beit Shemesh. If Shlomo, who lives in Beit Shemesh, did not sell his chametz, that's a problem. So it's important to see when you go to visit a small makolet to make sure they sold their chametz, and I'm going to review everything. Quickly, we spoke about the foundation of Mechirat Chametz, the sale, purchasing that was done already in the time of the Gemara, how it became more mass-produced. We said that there was a dispute whether it should be a personal sale or it should be a sale done by a rabbi. We believe that the sale should be done by a rabbi. In order to make the sale more serious, it must be done in the appropriate fashion. We should have a real Rav you should do a kinyan, you should list where the chametz is, you should list how much it's worth, you should allocate an area or armoire, cupboard, plate, table, storage unit in your house where the chametz is. You're allowed to sell real chametz if there's a need. That's both alcoholic beverages and not. You should not sell your dishes. You should not sell your kelim. You should not sell for crazy amounts. You should not sell on the internet. We discussed the validity of chametz being sold by a non-religious Jew who doesn't grasp what he's doing. That's why there's a push to sell as much. People go around, sell your chametz, sign here, because they want to prevent this issue of chametz. And the last discussion we discussed was the idea of selling in the large Israeli market. In short, you should confirm that the makolot you're going to sell their chametz, you should see that they have an actual shtar, and you should make sure you know what they're talking about. If they're religious, I'm assuming they know they're actually selling their chametz. If they're not, it should be discussed. When going to a supermarket around Israel, you must confirm that when you're purchasing products after Pesach, that they have actually sold their chametz. You should be careful to go to other institutions that don't have a Tudat Hechsher or products that seem to be from America with a certification, but, however, do not have the words Bishur Harbanut or OUisrael if they are actually sold for Pesach. I apologize for being late. You've been amazing. I'll leave time for questions. Yes, I do. I hope so.
You say look for the issue of the Rabbanut. So on the product, let's say it has the issue of the Rabbanut, but it's from last year. How do I know that it means that
No, they make sure that the current approval that they sell the chametz now. That's what they work on. They make sure that they sell the chametz even from last year. Yes, the importer will be contacted now to confirm to keep his products, be sure that they're selling now.
sell for this year?
Yeah,
They'll take it off?
of course. Yeah. Yes.
Exactly what you were saying, you should redo it. Number one is they just let you sign for everything. Number two, it has included your pots and your pants, wherever else the chametz could put.
That's why they're different. That's why you should sell. You have a chashav arav here. He knows that I sell chametz very well. If not, he'll call me. And you could list where the chametz. When I did the rabbaniyot where it's listed, I know a rabbaniyot in Israel where they make you sign where it was, how much it's worth. It has to be.
But the other thing is that have the stores, they have a sign that they sold their chametz. They sell that the same way.
Oh.
And they decide it.
So
you're going to call them
you're right. No. So there are stores that are done well. There are rabbaniyot that it's done well. No, say the large conglomerates like Rami Levy, they have a whole system where it's the large supermarkets. They sell it very. They remove the barcode from the products. They cover them. It's very important. They're done very well. The large supermarkets. Yes.
I always put down the location and the value. I've been here for 10 years. Every form is filled out by Orthodox, good rabbis, and none of that information. Which has your name, your address. So that's it. They said it's okay.
That's what I'm complaining about.
Why is it necessary to